Only one or is required another two out.
And you know, it's crazy, and of course, my daughter-in-laws are Japanese and Chinese.
I think they would like it.
I know. That's why I have this, as long as they know.
Film thing on it? That's all I
They have it just made
Okay.
that.
There.
Well, it's definitely not worse.
Okay, we're gonna reconvene and we're going to go right into our 1 o'clock, item D5. Richard, would you like to do the intro?
I would be happy to. I see Mr. Morris is here to go over the options that we've identified for moving the boardroom over to the courthouse square area. Essentially, there are 3 options that have been evaluated and a little bit quantified in terms of cost. I'll let Mr. Morris go into that. But option 1 would be the courthouse annex area where we toured a few weeks ago, remodeling that for the board chambers. The second option would be the courthouse annex upstairs where the auditor's office is currently located. And option 3 would be to remodel the former Superior courtroom in the old courthouse. And just a couple comments on the option 3. If we placed it in there because it's become apparent that, or at least our impression is that the board wants to maintain the historic courthouse as some sort of iconic figure of the county, which it's become. And if that's the case, and that is an assumption, but if that's the correct assumption that we're working on, it's not getting any cheaper to fix that building and to put an elevator in. And if we're going to put one in there, it's going to be cheaper in 2014 than it is in 2024. And so if the philosophy is that we're going to maintain that building in perpetuity, then it makes some sense to consider fixing it now and utilizing the space upstairs, the old courtroom facility, for a boardroom. It does require a lot of upfront expense, but again, if that's where we're headed, we need to look long term. So that's thrown in there as an option. And with that, I'll let Mr. Morris go through the 3 options we've identified.
To begin with, I'll give a little history of how I've been involved in this process over the last 20 years. Back in about 1995, we performed a space needs assessment. It was based on a 1994-95. It was based on a 1988 space needs assessment or study that was performed. And Bill Bixby was the CAO at the time of 94. And we discussed, okay, what are the options that the county had? I know there's been a lot of discussion about master planning of facilities in your board meetings. And so at that time, we came up with 7 scenarios and determined cost, where some of the departments would be. And of course, some of those things were done. Okay, not all of them, but some were. As time goes on in the last 20 years, there's a lot of changes that happened within your facilities due to funding or financing of some sort, and also who's paying for it, whether the state's paying for it or whether the county's paying for it. And so that makes a decision also what goes on. And so some of the things that have happened: the library was removed from the courthouse annex. The auditor's office and business administration was put on the upper floor. The courthouse was remodeled for the Superior courtroom, and the municipal court was put downstairs in the courthouse annex. Those were all remodeled. Okay, now those have since moved out of county facilities because of the new courthouse. The sheriff's office was moved to a building over by the jail. And the clerk's recorder's office was remodeled, and it just kind of kept going. The old county jail was removed, okay? And so there's a point at which you have to look at your facilities, not only for the space and needs of the staff, but also the thing that I feel is going to really trigger what you do in your facilities right now is ADA compliance, as well as energy efficiency of the building, okay? Utility costs have continued to go up, and so we have facilities like this particular building that is very inefficient and is costing a lot more than it needs to be for energy that needs to be addressed. And so consolidation of some of the buildings may be a way to go at this time as well. And so I do encourage you to continue to pursue some sort of master planning, but I would not just look at needs assessment, but I also would look at ADA compliance and energy efficiency as well. Okay, so to go with what we've been requested to do right now, the Lassen County Board Chambers. Okay, if we go with option one, which is the remodeling of the courthouse annex, I've given you some approximate costs. Okay, keep in mind, these are approximate, because until we actually do the plans and define what is going to be a part of that construction, we really can't give you a specific price. But for the actual remodeling of the space for the board chambers, I determined it would be about $193,000. I've also added in some costs for the dais, where the supervisors are sitting, furnishings, multimedia equipment, sound equipment. I envision those to be upwards of $40,000. Now, those can be a lot cheaper if you use existing furnishings, but you have to start somewhere. So the total cost is about $233,000. This particular option is probably the easiest to do for ADA compliance because of it being on the ground floor. It was set up for ADA parking several years ago when we put on the addition for security for the municipal court. And so the parking to the east of the building is considered accessible, ADA accessibility, and meets those standards. The restrooms are close to ADA compliance at this time. There is a section that discusses ADA compliance in that if there's a hardship or it costs a lot to make complete compliance, that the building department can waive some of those requirements. So existing restrooms on the lower floor, to meet ADA compliance, we would have to have some walls moved so that we have a better circulation into the restrooms. Okay? So in this proposal, I've added that. Also in this particular option, we have put in a price to redo the concrete walk and concrete landings to the south of the building so that there would be a better ADA compliance as well. Option number two. This is using the courthouse annex upper floor, and we would require the auditor's office to be moved. And at this point in time, I am suggesting moving it to the lower floor. Keep in mind, cost is quite a bit more, only because you're remodeling two spaces. You would have to remodel the downstairs for new office space, as well as the board chambers. The auditors also auditor's office also has some issues with all their cabling and servers, is that correct? Okay. Actually, the upper floor of the courthouse annex as a place for the board chambers is a much better place for you, okay? Mainly because we could raise the ceilings, get a little higher ceiling, it'll feel a whole lot more spacious. You wouldn't have the beams going down in the middle of the row, those type of things. So there's some great things for a supervisor's room upstairs, okay? The only issue that I have with that is ADA compliance. Okay? At this point in time, I'll give you a drawing here. Okay, at this particular time, the upstairs floor is higher than the sidewalk. And so there is a ramp that gets you up into the main entry to the building. Years ago, when this was done, you were only required to have ADA accessibility to the main entrance of the building. Okay? Someone that would be needing to get ADA compliance would have to park down near the old courthouse and come around the building and up into the building. The reason is the street parking cannot meet ADA guidelines. It's too steep, and I am sure the city of Susanville would not like you to change that. And so getting any sort of ADA compliance for parking spaces out in front of the building is probably next to impossible. Okay? Some of this parking downstairs would have to come up the walkway along Mill Street. There are stairs. This would have to be changed to get access to here. Okay? So any changes that you would have to make would be a ramp to get up to this section. Okay? Also, there are only two exits out of the upstairs of this building. One is the main entry, and then the other is to the southwest. Okay? Today's standards requires this to be ADA accessible, and so you'd have to install a ramp to get in here. Okay, the other option is to install an elevator, okay, that would make accessibility on both levels, okay. That is a possibility. We would envision that you could put it either on the south end of the building, or take out this stairwell and put it inside. Okay? If we put it inside here, you could have direct access from the lower floor, and then we would revamp this waiting area so you'd have access into a foyer, and then the board chambers would be here. The size of the board chambers would be virtually the same as it would be downstairs. So square footage for the board chambers is about the same. The other concerns I would have are if I put the elevator on this end of the building, then this corridor would have to extend all the way out there. Okay. Last thing that's an issue, if we have 100 people in the board chambers, plus all the other staff, it increases your demand for plumbing and plumbing fixtures. Okay, there are 2 unisex bathrooms that are ADA accessible at this time, and 2 smaller restrooms in the back that are not ADA accessible. So you may have to either increase the size of these restrooms or bring these up to ADA accessibility. Okay? So I've included those prices in this cost estimate. You guys have any questions about that? Okay, so the cost estimate for option 2 includes the elevator. The elevator's about $75,000. There's only certain ones that are acceptable by the state of California. But you also have a cost to create the chase for the elevator as well. So I've included that in here. So for the remodel of the upstairs, I figure about $290,000. And then the remodel for the auditor's office would be about $133,000. So the total would be about $487,000 plus the $40,000 for the dais, the furnishings, multimedia, and sound equipment. So you're about $527,000 for option 2. And finally, option 3, and this is remodeling the former Superior Courtroom into the board chambers. And this would also require a new elevator and enclosure. Okay, so this is the existing Superior Court room. These were the offices for the staff of the Superior Court. This is the front of the building.
While you're at it, why don't you point out the southwest corner, that fairly large room right there? That was the board chambers from about when the courthouse opened until they moved to the annex there in 1960, 61. So that was the original space for the board.
And presently, that was being used as a jury deliberation or a conference room.
Judge Harvey used it as his chambers when he was on the bench from, in fact, I think even the judges before Judge Harvey.
That's correct.
Prior to 1994 or so, that was the judge's chambers.
That's correct. Okay. So there's several options that could be done. As soon as you get into the courthouse, that means that you're going to have to upgrade the men's and women's restrooms to ADA accessibility. They're men's and women's restrooms. There's 2 of them on the upper floor. There's only a women's restroom, I believe, on the lower floor. Okay, so you would have to have these brought up to ADA accessibility. You also have to have access to a stairwell, because if I put the elevator on this end and said, okay, I'm going to take this out and just have a hallway that goes to the elevator, I have to have an emergency stairwell as well. I cannot use the elevator as the emergency access only. And any corridor that's more than 20 feet long has to have emergency exit. Okay? So I could put it here.
Did you ever see the plans that were developed for an elevator, restrooms, and like a service corridor off the end of it, sometime in the late 70s or early 80s? I want to say late 70s.
I have not seen that.
Because what they at that time, there was a proposal that was brought forth to connect the courthouse building to the old jail, where you drive through between the 2 buildings. That would be closed off. It would be like a breezeway that would extend across to be able to tie the 2 in. So you remove those bathrooms, the men on the 2nd floor, came in on the bottom floor, and in that breezeway in the center, they were gonna put the elevator shaft, and then you would have handicapped equipped restrooms on either side, men's and women's on all 3 floors. The basement, the ground floor, and the upper floor, and there had also been, was a stairwell that also wound it for in case the elevator broke or something.
Right.
And so it was really designed to, and the architect that designed that or proposed that, to tie the 2 stone buildings together and to make it look something compatible. It had like a glass front, so what happened would be is your hallway would extend all the way across. So the facing the Lassen Street side would have been a glass wall, and then the inside is where you would have the service components, and it would kind of go back towards, where into that parking area behind. But that was there was a set of plans, and if I can locate those, I'd be really happy to. I think I have a copy somewhere.
Very good. So, the options are either to put it on the end of the building. Another option I had was to take this wall out and make this a corridor and put it behind the building here. This location and this location are probably the less obtrusive to the historical character and design of the courthouse itself. Okay? So those were 2 options. And so in this particular cost estimate, I've included $75,000 for the elevator and upwards of $120,000 for the enclosure and stairwell. Okay? Now that is bare bones. If you were going to do anything else, as Jim was talking about, outside of the building, the costs go up exponentially. If we did anything to either of these, we would have to at least retrofit for seismic this wall or this wall as well.
Do you have a copy of the seismic study?
Yes, I do. Okay. And so it would be at least $40,000 just to do that. Okay? And so my estimate is $425,000. Total with contingencies and profit of $508,000. And if you add all the furnishings and equipment, you're up to $548,000. Okay? Okay? So, option 3 really is beneficial if you make the decision to go in and start gutting it and remodeling the entire courthouse. That's what it really boils down to.
That's going to be part of the focus of this task force that was established, that we made appointments this morning to look at over the next 2 years. It's all part of what that group needs to work on.
Now, the reason I brought up the historical part of it is that was a study that was done 20 years ago. Okay? And like I say, some of the work's been done, some hasn't. There's a point at which it is important to do some remodeling and start the process rolling so that you can free up space for future remodeling or future changes on other facilities. What I mean by that is if the board chambers was taken to the courthouse annex at this time, that frees up a certain amount of space here. Okay? Then you guys need to decide whether you're going to upgrade this particular building for ADA compliance. Because even moving the planning department or building department down to this level, they would probably require some remodeling. As soon as you start remodeling, that triggers ADA compliance. So now you're having to do something to this building. Okay? You may find out in your need assessment that this is the most inefficient building you have, and it's gonna cost the most to remodel it, maybe we get rid of this one and we move everybody to somewhere else. Okay, those are the issues you have to look at. And so, I would think at this time, if you do decide to put the board chambers in the courthouse annex, that starts a process, okay? And if that's the case, then I'd try to keep the cost down to minimum rather than going to option 2 that's gonna cost you twice as much. Any questions?
Thank you.
I got one question on option 3 you talked about, so you're gonna have to put in a new stairwell as well, or you can use existing stairwells? You're just putting in an elevator and that's it?
A new stairwell as well, yes.
Why do we need a new stairwell? I mean, I'm just,
What you get into on, you have to have certain emergency exiting from a building,
right,
okay? Once you have a certain number of occupants within the building, 49 is when it really triggers anything. You have to have 2 exits, okay?
there's already 2 stairwells there, isn't there?
They only go down to 1 exit. The 2 stairwells are, yes, they're on both sides of the foyer, but there's only 1 entry, okay? And so, once you begin to remodel, if we have the board chambers on the upper floor, we'd have at least 85 to 100 people is what we're designing for. Now I have to have 2 exits, and they have to be a certain distance from each other, okay? Also, any hallway that's more than 20 feet long has to have an exit, okay? And so whatever we do here, unless I just put the elevator right in the middle of the building, will trigger having to have another exit.
Okay.
Anyone else? Questions?
I think it's all good information, but I think the only option that we really have before us is to look at option 1. And I think that for at this present time, so that's what I'd be in favor of. I kind of think some of the numbers are, I mean, I think Jeff is looking at what the potential, until you get the drawings done and the bids come in, you know, it could potentially be that high, but I don't think the amount of money that we're looking at should be that high, so that's where I'm at.
Well, I have no particular question exactly yet, other than, I agree that, other than with too much money. You know, and the only way you do one or the other is if you did do a capital improvement plan and had all that planned out. It's,
Well, hopefully the task force will come back with a proposal that looks at developing the whole square and creating, you know, 30,000 square feet of additional office space, which these improvements would be a part of. And when you do that, all these buildings that we have here now scattered around would be surplus, and we move everybody over into the energy efficient.
but you can imagine what that would cost.
Yeah, it would be a fairly large sum, and it would be one that we'll probably have to go to the voters for some tax support.
You're way farther than we want to get involved in.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're premature getting into that proposal.
Okay, if there's no other comments of the board members, I'm gonna open up the public comment. Eileen Spencer, we missed you this morning.
I was gathering things. I can appreciate Jeff's work on this, even though I disagree with some of his conclusions. The auditor, if you went with, let me start out with, you're being pushed and pressured by one emotional attachment here. And I think there's 4 people here, sitting here, that are looking at a more practical, and I think, I agree with Mr. Pyle, is that we should have a plan. This shouldn't be done and move forward on an emotional thing, which it now is, the premise is emotion, and ego. The task force is really important, because then you're going, it also will help Richard with his CIP to have a plan. You know, this moving people around and moving the clerk to here, moving there,